There's a little disclaimer on this slide. So I'm not an expert, obviously. I'm a software developer at Verafin, so sleep is not my profession. So our agenda today, we're going to do the poll we already did. Then there's going to be a studies section. We're going to talk about some recent studies that were done on sleep in health category and in performance category. We have a science section. We kind of need to understand some things about how sleep works in order to understand how the hacks are going to work. And then we'll have a summary slide. That's our money slide on the end. Hopefully this presentation won't put anyone to sleep. That's not the point. But first, I'll just give everyone the raw truth. The raw truth is we need about 7 hours of quality sleep per day, kind of across the board, to maximize well-being. The graph on the right-hand side here, you'll notice that it centers around 7. So this graph represents all-cause mortality. So all causes of mortality increase for a given person if they get less than 7 hours sleep, and it gets worse as you get less, and more is actually even worse than less sleep. I have an asterisk here. There's a small group of people that have elite sleeper genes, but if you look to your left and look to your right, none of you have that gene. It's very unlikely you have it. It's only like, in some cases it's 1 in thousands, and in other cases it's 1 in like millions, so it's rare. So generally 7 hours. So sleep and health studies. So the first study I want to talk about was about daylight savings time. So daylight savings time affects about like 1.5 billion people in like 70-odd countries or so. There was a study done in the state of Michigan, about 10 million people. And what they found was that in the spring, when we lose an hour of sleep, there's a 24% increase in heart attacks the next day across the entire state. And in the fall, when we get an hour back, there's a 21% decrease in heart attacks. So it's a very stark difference. This is just 1 hour of sleep being missed. And this study was done across a 3-year period. So this wasn't a one-off, right? They checked this in 6 different data points. There was several obesity studies. They show that, I should mention too, before I move on, in almost every case, on the bottom of each slide, I have little blue links that you can see. And this is if you want to track down this slide after on the SharePoint, you can see where I got this information from. The obesity study showed that if you have fewer than 6 hours sleep a night, you're more likely to have an increased body fat percentage. And participants in those studies with an average of 8 hours or more had the lowest body fat percentage of the study group. There was a second study that explained why this is true somewhat. I'm going to quote it. Increased food intake during insufficient sleep is a physiological adaptation to provide energy needed to sustain additional wakefulness. Yet when food is easily accessible, intake surpasses that needed. So generally what we see is if you spend more time awake, you need more food to be awake. So sleepers have a tendency to have a lower body fat percentage. This is similar in diabetes studies. They show that if you have fewer than 5 hours sleep a night, which is a little bit stark, but you have a greatly increased risk of having or developing type 2 diabetes, and improved sleep can positively influence blood sugar levels. It'll actually reduce the effects if you have good sleep. This is probably my favorite one. This one's crazy. They did a study with 2 groups of people. They basically split the groups in half. They didn't name them, but I named them. I named them the sleepy group and the alert group. So group sleepy had fewer than 7 hours of sleep, and group alert had 8 hours or more of sleep. And then they exposed all of those people to the rhinovirus, the common cold. The group that had less sleep were 3 times more likely to pick up the cold. So just by having sleep, your immune system is like up to 3 times more effective for different kinds of viruses. Now, sleep and performance. So I've become obsessed with Dr. Matthew Walker. He has a book called Why We Sleep, which I recommend. And he has this quote: "Sleep is the greatest legal performance enhancing drug." And as an example of that, I'm going to tell you about a chronic sleep restriction study that was done. So this little graphic person I have here, you'll notice this person is smiling. They're happy, but their brain is down in the red area here. So in my hype email, I mentioned what we learned from this study. I'll tell you about the study. In the study, they subjected people to 14 days of 6 hours of sleep. These were people who regularly had 7 or more hours of sleep. Every 2 waking hours, the subjects were tested for alertness, working memory, cognitive throughput, and sleepiness. At the end of the study, I will quote from the conclusion: chronic restriction of sleep to 6 hours or less per night produced cognitive performance deficits equivalent to up to 2 nights of total sleep deprivation. And it appears that even relatively moderate sleep restriction can seriously impair waking neurobehavioral functions in healthy adults. Here's an interesting thing about that. They used the Stanford Sleepiness Scale. And at day 14, at the end of that study, people reported that they were not sleepy. So they had completely adjusted to the sleepiness, but their cognitive deficits didn't improve. So another line from the conclusion: sleepiness ratings suggest that subjects were largely unaware of these increasing cognitive deficits. So in summary, if you get 6 hours of sleep every night for 2 weeks or more, especially if this is regular for you, you won't feel, it's possible you won't feel sleepy, but you will be suffering from, quote, seriously impaired neurobehavioral functions, alertness, working memory, cognitive throughput. You could be walking past people at work who are not sleepy, who are just not performing at their best, and they have no idea, right? So we'll do a quick recap. It was a lot of information. The summary is 7 hours of sleep is good. Not 7 hours of sleep is not good. It's basically where we are. So if anyone came late, this is what we have so far. And now it's time for science. I'll tell you a quick story here first about science. My partner, Nicole, works at the company too. And I'm a science fanatic. It's too much, I know. And Nicole is, kind of done with it to some degree. We were driving down the highway once on our way to St. John's, probably for a team supper or something. And there was a rainbow in the sky. And Nicole said, "Terry, how do rainbows work exactly?" And I got so excited, not exaggerating, the hair on my arm stood up. I was really excited. I'm like, this could be an on-ramp. I have to be able to explain this to her in an engaging way. I can't overdo it. Keep it short, keep it interesting. So I start thinking it through. I'm like, all right. So I start explaining it to her, and I'm all full of energy and I'm excited about it. I hit about the 60-second mark. Nicole is snoring, like not making fun of me, actually asleep. And so a couple of times since then, we've been in bed and she's been not being able to sleep very well. She's literally turned to me and said, "Terry, can you talk science to me?" Like, yeah, puts her right out. So worst case scenario, if this deck is not of use to people, I can at least use it to help Nicole get to sleep. So how sleep works. This is the something probably people have heard about. Our bodies have something called a circadian rhythm, which is a 24-hour clock. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but what I want to point out is that the 2 orange boxes I have on the screen, I added those. Those are when melatonin begins entering your system and begins leaving your system if you are on this schedule. So we all have a 24-hour clock and it may be shifted forward or backward, but if you match this, basically at night, melatonin starts being secreted and in the morning it stops. Melatonin is called the darkness hormone. It's the sleep trigger. So what you want to happen is you want melatonin to be released when you want it to be released. You want a lot of melatonin to be released while you're sleeping because it helps you stay asleep. And then in the morning, you want it to be stopped. So this 24-hour cycle, it's important. It matches the rotation of the earth, and that's not a coincidence. And there's a lot of information we can take about how the things happen on earth related to how things happen in our body. And there's a lot of links there. The other one, I have high alertness squared too. I'm not going to go into that right now, but I'm going to bring it up again later. Our bodies are at peak alertness at 10 o'clock in the morning, roughly, if we are on this schedule. And we'll come back to that. I'll make one little point here. Teenagers are actually shifted forward in the circadian rhythm about anywhere between 1 and 3 hours. So if you have a teenager and they sleep in late and they stay up late, that's not because they have chosen to do that necessarily. It's actually physiological. And we know that's not simply teenagers causing themselves to do that or shifting their own circadian rhythms. It's because we see it in nature. It's in other mammals. So there's actually a species of monkey that's shifted forward for all members of that species that hit puberty. They shift forward like 5 hours. So this is a screenshot from my phone. So this is one of my nights of sleep. I use a system. This is my Garmin Instinct watch, and this is an app called Garmin Connect. If you have a sleep tracker, I recommend playing with it and getting used to it. It'll give you information like this hypnogram here on the bottom. The hypnogram is important because it'll tell you when you're getting certain kinds of sleep and how much. And sleep happens in 90-minute cycles, and you can kind of see that here. So the dots on the bottom are 1 hour marks, and you can see the pink, that's for my REM sleep. They happen roughly 90 hours apart, so you should be seeing this. And if you have a sleep tracker, you can just make sure everything is kind of lining up. The pink specifically is called REM sleep, and it's when we dream. That's when most of our dreaming happens. I'm going to give you another quote from Dr. Walker. It's during dreaming that we take all of the information that we previously learned and we collide it with all of the new information we learned that day. The brain starts to seek it and test novel connections and associations, and you wake up the next morning with a revised mind-wide web that is now capable of divining incredible solutions to previously impenetrable problems. So what's happening when we go into REM sleep is new information is colliding with old information and new connections are being made. So you're actually best able to utilize newly acquired information after you've slept. It's not right after you learn it. There is the top of this graph, this pie chart is actually what is seen on the screenshot, and the bottom is the recommended. And I'm getting too much REM sleep. It looks like I'm dreaming too much, but generally, if you get a sleep tracker set up, you're going to want to see things roughly like they are on the bottom. And then we have deep sleep. We're going to go into deep sleep a little bit more. Deep sleep is also called slow wave or restorative sleep. And I'm hoping this comes across, and I'm going to play a little audio clip and we'll see if you guys can hear it. What you should have heard was something like, it'll sound like this. And it's roughly at that interval. And even though that's sound, that's actually electrical signals in your brain that have been converted to sound just so you could hear it. But that's the slow waves that your brain is creating when you're in deep sleep. And for a long time, we had no idea what that was or why your brain did that. And it's all of your neurons are actually synchronized. So your whole brain is doing that. Like neurons are all firing in a wave and slowing back, and then all firing in a wave and then slowing back. And in order to understand what those are, we have to talk about poop. This image on the screen that you're seeing, cells are living things individually, and all living things take in what they need and then they expel what they don't need. When cells do it, they get rid of waste. It's called exocytosis. This happens in your brain, so your neurons do this. So after a day of thinking and problem solving and optimizing at Verafin and talking to customers, your brain literally fills with poop. And here is one of the things that was in the hype email. Not until 2013, so 9 years ago, did we know about the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is when the cavities in your brain open up and cerebrospinal fluid moves into the brain, into those cavities, and clears the waste out. This is a fairly new thing. It's kind of amazing that we've only recently started to understand this. And it was only 3 years ago that we realized that this is linked to the slow waves that I was describing a second ago. So the blue blinking down in this video image, that's the slow wave generation system. And the red is the cerebrospinal fluid moving through your brain and cleaning things up. So the point of this is twofold. One is to note that the space is actually quite new. There's a lot of new information coming into the sleep space, so it's worth paying attention to. And the other reason I wanted to show this was to allow for you to have a new joke. And the joke is not really a joke, but if you're working late at night and at home or at work or wherever, and you're making mistakes and someone says something like, why did you do that? What's going to have poop in your brain? But you could say, actually, yeah, I do have poop in my brain, and I literally need to go into a slow wave deep sleep so the glymphatic system can use cerebrospinal fluid to clear the exocytosis waste out of my neural cavity. No one has laughed at it yet, so we'll see. So this is a small list of some of the things that affect sleep. And thank you, Danny G, it's funny. And I'm going to talk about each of them a tiny bit, where we're going to run through this stuff pretty quickly. The first one is light, color, and intensity. So again, with the circadian rhythm, we know there's a 24-hour clock in our body, roughly 24 hours, and it matches up with the rotation of the Earth. That's not a surprise. So what we see in the daytime, what we've been used to for millions of years, is bright light, and that light is like white or blue. It's high energy light. And at night, it's the opposite, right? So there was a study done with people who read for 1 hour before they go to sleep. The study was split into two groups. In both groups, the people were in their bedroom. The bedroom was dimly lit, and they would read for 1 hour before they went to sleep. Group A was reading from a paper book, and Group B was reading from a device, whether a tablet or a phone. The group that was reading from a device, there was a 3-hour delay in their melatonin peak, and there was 50% less melatonin at peak. So there's fairly substantial evidence that using devices before you go to sleep is not great. There's currently some talk about whether it has to do with engagement, whether you're highly engaged. But in these cases, it was people reading, similar reading material, and it was the screen itself that had the effect. I noticed the question about Kindles, devices that have yellowing. So I actually have a picture of that. If you have a device that can greatly reduce the intensity of the light and color shift it to orange. So in iPhones, there's something called Night Shift, and in Android devices, they have something called Eye Comfort Shield. Then that will benefit you. So you want to shift your light to the oranges away from the blues, and you want to reduce the intensity. But generally, you also want to avoid mental stimulation. So I'm going to recommend later not to be doing this in bed at all, but we'll get to that. So the next one is another one you probably could have guessed based on, again, the Earth's rotation thing. At night, it gets colder. We're used to that. As soon as the sun goes down, things start to chill off. And that has been proven by several studies to be another trigger for us for sleeping. We need our core body temperature to drop internally by 1 degree Celsius before we can fall asleep. And when that happens, as I have on the screen, we fall asleep faster, we go deeper into sleep, and we don't wake as often. The graph on the right-hand side, this was a huge study. 7 million nighttime sleep records were pulled, shared anonymously from sleep tracking devices like this one, across 68 countries and across a 2-year period. And they compared sleep data with meteorological data, so what the weather was like. So we know there's at least a loose correlation between the temperature is outdoors and what the temperature is going to be in your bedroom. And what we see is that, generally speaking, if it's really hot, people don't sleep well. And if it's really cold, people get extra sleep. Their body needs it. And there's something, the hot bath trick. The hot bath trick is that if you get a hot bath before you go to sleep, it'll increase your temperature while you're in the bath, but your body vasodilates. So all of the blood will rise to the surface. And that's why when you get out of a hot bath, you're red. And then once you're out of the bathtub, your temperature plummets. So it's the perfect time then to get in bed, and you'll fall right to sleep. Routine. Routine is exceptionally important. So we talked about circadian rhythm. We've talked about melatonin. And when you want your brain to be pushing melatonin out, and when you want it to be pulling back. It's important here to note that we have a lizard brain. So we have like the prefrontal cortex where we do all of the important high-level thinking, but way back here is where the circadian rhythm is managed, way down in the lizard brain. And if you want to manage that part of your lizard brain, it has to be through training. It has to be through habit. You can't rationalize that system. So routine is very important. We all know that, or we probably all know that with babies and children, if you have problems getting your kids to sleep, everywhere in the literature, and when you talk to medical staff about what do I do here, or your doctor, it's the same thing every time. It's routine, routine, routine. Give your babies and your small kids a bath, get them into their jammies, the bath, again with the bath trick, bring them into a dimly lit room, do something relaxing with them, like reading a book to them, and you have to do it at the same time every night. So this is not just true for babies and children. This is true for everybody. It's just we seem to not do it when we get older, but it works. Parents will know right away that this works. So generally, we want to use a set bedtime if you can. One trick that I use personally, I have all my laptops and my phone are all set to just do a very low intensity light and turn full orange at 10:30. And not only does that help because of the light and the intensity I mentioned earlier, but it helps because it teaches my brain that this is part of the routine. It's the same time every night. So I've been working late and been at my desk like 10:30 trying to get something done. And as soon as everything switches orange, I just start getting sleepy right away. The routine kicks in, brain starts releasing melatonin, and it really works. I'm going to say that once you lie down in bed, don't do anything else. So your brain has to learn that if you're lying in bed, it's sleep time. Again, this is part of the habit and the lizard brain. You have to teach your brain. You can't be reading if you're lying down. If you must or want to really read in bed, then do it sitting up. Really try not to watch TV or be on your phone when you're in bed. Your brain needs to learn that once you're in that bedroom and the lights are off and you're under your covers and you're laid down, that the only thing you're supposed to be doing there is sleep. And it's actually highly suggested too that if you are having trouble sleeping and you've been in the room for 30 minutes, lying in bed and not falling asleep, you should get out of bed specifically for that reason, because you don't want to ruin the training of your brain, making you think, "Oh, I've been lying here for a long time. This is fine." It's not fine. So you should go to another room. You should stay in dim lighting, do something relaxing, like again, reading a paper book or like a Kindle with like the light really orange, and then wait till you get sleepy and then go back. And also don't eat, because that'll trigger your system into trying to be awake again. So here's the one nobody wants to see. Caffeine. So if you have one dose of caffeine in the evening, let's just say you're not drinking caffeine all day, but or you are drinking caffeine all day, actually doesn't matter, but you have one coffee right before bed. It decreases the amount of deep sleep you have by 20%. And that's actually the same as if you're 15 years older. So you can age yourself simply by having enough caffeine in your system to reduce your deep sleep. Because as you age, the amount of deep sleep you need gets less, but caffeine can make you have less deep sleep even though you need more. So you're aging your brain. Caffeine has a long half-life. If you drink a cup of coffee at say noon, then half of the caffeine is still in your system at 6:00 p.m. and a quarter of that, the other half, or another half-life, is still in your system by midnight. So a noon coffee, 25% of the caffeine is still in your system at midnight when you're trying to go to sleep. Caffeine is still a useful tool. So if you have, this is something you might want to hear. So if you have a medium Tim's, that's about 200 milligrams of caffeine in it, right? According to the studies, that can elicit equivalent performance benefits to 3 hours of additional sleep. Having one Tim's, the same as getting 3 hours sleep. But that does not work for habitual drinkers. If you're drinking a lot of coffee on a regular basis, it won't work for you. And that's what this graph is on the side. This graph on the side is when you are putting enough caffeine in your system, it's interrupting your sleep, and you need caffeine then only to compensate for your lack of sleep. So if you're a habitual coffee drinker and you're sitting at your desk next to someone who doesn't drink any coffee, you with 2 or 3 coffees in your system add about the same level as the person who doesn't drink caffeine at all. So it's not necessarily helping you be better than what you could be naturally. It's just bringing you back to normal. And remember the 10 a.m. alertness thing I mentioned back in the circadian rhythm? So we're back to that now. You're at peak alertness at 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you are not inhibited by this graph, this caffeine system, this feedback loop, you're not a habitual drinker, but you just want to have a coffee in the morning to help pep you up, it's probably fine. But try not to drink coffee past 9 o'clock, and you shouldn't need caffeine by the time you get to 10 o'clock, because that's when your system is naturally at peak alertness. So I want to mention with exercise, think of the last time that you were really sick. Even if you're the type of person that doesn't sleep very well, the last time you were sick, your body had no problem shutting you down and making you sleep. We get really sleepy when we're sick because our body knows that we have things to heal, and what we would like to be able to do is to tap into that system. So night after night after night, I'm unable to sleep, and then I get a bad flu, and boy, I can sleep for 10 hours a day, no problem. I wish I could do that whenever I wanted instead of when I was only asleep. And you can. The answer is exercise. Exercise does about the same thing to your body, especially something like resistance training, where you're really tearing up your muscles, and that's the intention, hypertrophy. If you do that, then your body knows when time comes to sleep that there's repairing to do. So you're more likely to shut down. And not just that, we're going to talk we're very close to the end here. The last slide we have about specific things that affect sleep is the next slide. It's about anxiety and stress. And during anxiety and stress, your body releases chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline, that prevent you from sleeping. And exercise helps you fall asleep faster because it reduces those stress hormones. So if you're one of the anxiety people and you have problems sleeping because you're hyped up when it's time to go to bed, then exercise will help deal with that too. Running outdoors is a great thing because of the outside light, and it reinforces the circadian rhythm. And avoid exercise before bed because it wakes you up and it raises your core body temperature, and it'll do the opposite of what you want. So now we're on the anxiety stress slide. I want to say, if you generally have anxiety or stress, you probably want to talk to a professional about that. And you may just have a chemical imbalance, right? I have a chemical imbalance, and I take a drug to deal with that chemical imbalance. And so now, once my chemical balance is being dealt with, now I can focus on things that are within my control. The autonomic nervous system is the system that is in control of all of your automated systems. So how fast your breathing is, what your heart rate is, things like that. And when you're anxious or stressed, like if you're lying in bed and you're thinking about something that you did in high school and you're embarrassed by it, and you shouldn't be thinking about it because it happened 20 years ago, but your brain just won't stop. When you do that, your autonomic nervous system kicks in and it puts you into fight or flight mode. So it'll output cortisol. And cortisol will stop melatonin. It's a melatonin inhibitor. It'll ramp you up. And people who this happens for regularly, they end up actually being afraid of not being able to sleep, which is what this graph is on the side. So you can end up in a cycle where you're nervous about not being able to sleep, and that nervousness is keeping you awake. And one of the approaches to that, if you don't have a chemical imbalance and you've dealt with chemical imbalance, is mindfulness, which we'll talk about in a second. So here's the money slide. This is the summary. So switch to decaf if you can. There's a lot of health benefits to the coffee bean, but it doesn't have to be the caffeine. It's the coffee bean itself. So keep drinking coffee, but switch to decaf. That's what I do. And caffeine only before 9 o'clock. Exercise daily. Even a little bit of exercise is huge. You don't have to exercise a lot. The graph looks like this. So just a little bit of exercise gives you a lot of benefits from a sleep standpoint. Routine is very important. You can do things like turn off your household lights an hour before bed, just start dimming things down, and have all your screens shift over to night mode, like I mentioned, ideally on a schedule. You want your bedroom to be cool and dark and no stimulation. White noise is a good idea. If you're in an environment like a dorm, for example, and there's a lot of incidental loud noises that can potentially wake you up, then put like a large air purifier or something in your room. Within a couple of nights, you'll very quickly get used to the loud noise because it's constant, and it'll put you right to sleep like a baby after a while, and that'll help drown out the outside noise. And the hot bath, like we already mentioned. Now, I'm not saying to do all of these things all of the time. We shouldn't all be stoic. That would be silly. However, it would be worth the science experiment. If you just took 3 weeks and you tried doing most of these things, it's worth you knowing how your body is going to react. If you did this, like what kind of sleep could you be getting if you did everything correctly? And now for people who have a racing mind, if you're one of those people who says, I just think a lot and I worry a lot, it's just who I am as a person. Well, not necessarily. Assuming you don't have a chemical imbalance, then you are responsible for practicing and controlling when your mind is racing. You choose what you get to think about. And this is where the military method comes from. So the military method actually came from the American military. I thought it was the British military at one point, but it wasn't. And I'll tell you briefly how it works. You get in bed, you get comfortable, you get a new position where you would normally be able to fall asleep. You breathe slowly and deeply. If you sleep next to people, you know that no one is breathing quickly when they're sleeping. It's all slow, deep breaths. So you have to do the same thing slowly and deeply. You relax every muscle, and you start either at your head or at your toes, and you picture every muscle with your eyes closed, and you slowly go through them and you make sure everything's relaxed. You're probably going to find your shoulders maybe need to be pulled down a bit because we all get tense up here, especially desk workers. Make sure everything is perfectly relaxed. This is all part of a routine too. Your brain will get used to this process. And then you clear your mind. And some of the suggested ways to do that are to picture yourself in a canoe staring up at an empty sky, or to picture yourself in a black velvet hammock in a completely black room. The one I personally like is I like to picture that I'm in my bedroom. The walls are still there, but the roof is gone, and I can see a clear sky with clouds in it. And I'm just watching clouds go by. If visualizations don't work for you, what they suggest is to just repeat to yourself, don't think. But what you're going to find happening is your brain is going to want to not do this because it's boring. So you're going to try to think about something else. You have to keep pulling yourself back. So this is very much like meditation. You're going to have to keep pulling your mind back. You're going to have to keep coming back to forcing yourself to do the boring thing. And that's what you want, because boring will put you to sleep, literally, like when I'm talking science to Nicole. The studies show that if you do this, if you practice this and do a good job of it for about 6 weeks, then you should be able to fall asleep within 2 minutes. Some people can fall asleep much faster. They use this method and they can fall asleep within like 10 or 15 seconds, which is kind of crazy, but 2 minutes seems to be the average. And now we probably have a backlog of questions we can get to. There's a couple of pieces of information I have. I know that we're at our strongest around 5 o'clock in the day, if you want to maximize what you can bench. But you definitely don't want to exercise past, what did I read? I think it was 3 p.m., but I'm not sure. Nope, that's a lie. That's not true. You can exercise all the way up to about 2 hours before bed. That's what it is. The 3 p.m. thing is a napping thing. Don't nap past 3 p.m. It'll depend in part when it hits you. So if that happens during deep sleep, it's going to be more problematic than if it happens during light sleep. And the 90-minute cycles that I mentioned, those actually, you actually come almost out and completely wake up at the 90-minute mark. So if you find yourself waking up a bunch in the middle of the night and you're switching positions, a lot of the time, especially if you use a sleep tracker, you're going to realize that those happen exactly at your 90-minute intervals, or like roughly 90 minutes. So it'll depend on when it wakes you up. But the best way I've read to keep track of that is to just let your body be a guide for how much sleep you feel like you need. If that happens to you during the night and you're otherwise doing everything fine and you normally feel rested during the day, and then the next morning after that happens, you still feel relatively rested, then it's probably fine. And if you don't feel rested, then it's probably not. But I'd probably fall back to the sleep tracker for that one. It'll help tell you if you're getting what you need in the various categories. I personally love it. I have I don't currently, but I had air filters in my room for a long time. We used to have an air filter in both of our kids' rooms, and it really helps keeping them asleep. I love it. The only problem with it is when you go somewhere else, like a hotel room, and the kids are really used to it, it gets a bit harder. But other than that, as far as I know, it's fantastic. There's no real downsides aside from eventually when you sleep somewhere where there is no white noise. Yeah, blue light filters are good, I think, in the same way that doing the orange filter shift is. But mostly the all day thing is fine because you want to be asleep all day. It really only becomes a problem at night around the time when your brain is supposed to start releasing melatonin. So if you're on a normal schedule where you'd get up at, like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, your melatonin should start going into your brain at around 9 o'clock in the evening. And that's about the time when blue light then becomes a problem. So at that point, if you're using the glasses that are the blue light filters, fantastic. Or if you're just reducing the intensity and orange shifting everything, that's also great. One problem is it's not just screens, it's household lighting too. A lot of us have switched to like LED bulbs, and those are very white light. A lot of them are tilted even towards the blue end. So the tip about turning your lights off in the evenings an hour before you go to bed is a good tip too. Just start dimming everything down so you're giving your brains the correct signal. But blue light filters are definitely good, yeah. But like again, they don't. I wouldn't worry about them during the day. you can actually use the inverse to help wake you up. So if you get up in the morning and you have to be up now and you're not refreshed, then jam yourself with blue light, and it'll do the opposite effect. It'll actually cut off the melatonin and it'll start waking you up, similar to caffeine. There's actually a type of insomnia that is that where you don't really have much of a problem falling asleep, but you wake up a lot. And I did not research that. There are several items of insomnia that I kind of stayed away from. So I think if you're in the insomnia category, you're probably going to end up not getting one of or several of the types of sleep that you need, and all of the types of sleep are very important. And so that one may be a seek professional advice answer. They do, but most of the sleep researchers that I read, interestingly, I can do this. I did prepare a slide on naps because I thought I might see this. If you're finding naps restorative, you're probably sleep deprived, and you should be making sure you're getting sufficient sleep at night instead. If you have to nap, do it not after 3 p.m. This is why I was confused about 3 p.m. earlier. You want to keep your naps early in the day because it'll mess up your melatonin later at night and you'll have trouble sleeping again. The ideal length is 20 to 25 minutes. You don't want to do a full 90-minute cycle if you nap, or you'll have something called sleep inertia, grogginess, basically. You want to do 20, 25 minutes and then stop. So you probably want to set a timer. And caffeine naps are apparently super powerful, where you drink a cup of coffee and then set your timer for 20 minutes later. So then you wake up refreshed from the sleep and the caffeine is kicked in and you should be good to go if that's an option for you. You directly need less sleep and less of the various types of sleep as you age. But there's debate as to whether that's good or bad. So your body will just stop needing, you'll wake up and you'll feel refreshed and you'll have gotten enough sleep, supposedly, as you start to get older. And we see this in science across the board. But there's debate as to whether that's actually beneficial. Like it's maybe more sleep would be beneficial as you get older and like kind of trying to get more as opposed to just letting your body wake you up. So it's debatable, but you definitely naturally will just feel like you need less sleep as you get older, for sure. I had read and I mentioned that if you can't sleep and you get up and walk around, not to eat. And so you'd want to not eat when you're close to bedtime, because eating itself is an indication to your brain that it's awake time. As we know, as humans, it's really easy to eat food and gain weight. It's really hard to lose weight. Your body just loves calories, right? It's just an evolutionary tick. So as soon as your body starts getting calories, your brain says, oh my God, we can't sleep now. There's calories. I absolutely have to stay awake and consume as much as I possibly can. So eating is a trigger to stay awake. So I don't know what the cutoff is, but I know you definitely don't want to eat right before bed. It'll help. It'll also prevent sleep. It'll cut your sleep. You can just try to stick to the main guidelines. So when you can try to reduce the amount of liquid you consume beforehand to reduce that problem in general. Also, you can try sitting down to pee instead of standing up if you're a guy. It'll just reduce the body strain. Try to have night lights in your bathroom so you don't turn the lights on. If you walk into your bathroom in the middle of the night and turn your light on, you're blasting yourself with white light and your brain is like, okay, it's awake time. And then getting back to sleep is going to be brutal. So just try keeping it on the down low, dim light, not too much strain. Sit down on the toilet and shuffle yourself back to bed as quickly as you can, basically. Thanks, everybody. See ya.